Welcome back to Task and Purpose.
The US Army has a problem. If war were to break out in the South China Sea, the combat there would require low-flying, fast-moving helicopters unlike anything in their current inventory. And these would be used on these remote island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific. We already pushed our fleet of 2,000 aging 1970s-era Blackhawk helicopters well beyond their original capabilities in Iraq and Afghanistan. Listen, you've done good, girl, but now it's time for you to enjoy your well-earned retirement. The Blackhawk is just not up to these unique, new challenges on the modern battlefield. So in this episode, we're going to examine what the new capabilities are for the Future Vertical Lift program and what it brings to the table, the new tactics that US Army infantrymen could use with these helicopters, and whether or not the Army will choose the correct prototype for this future helicopter out of the two choices in the competition, or if we'll end up with the new universal camouflage pattern of helicopters here. If you enjoy a good unironic hua every now and again, then hit the like and subscribe button and let's move out. Guys, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Navy Federal Credit Union. They really understand our community because they're a part of it themselves. If you know someone in the military, you really need to tell them about the benefits of using Navy Federal Credit Union. So members earn and save an average of $352 per year.
Navy Federal also offers its members saving rates that's 3 times the industry average.
I'm not good at math, but that's a lot more. And they have a credit card with rates that are 5% lower than the industry average. Navy Federal Credit Union is a top VA loan lender, so if you need a new house, a new car, these are the people that you want to go to. And if you have any questions, they have a 24/7 customer service line. They understand the military community and they're optimized to help you navigate your benefits and your banking. If you're looking for a way to support the channel and help yourself, then just check it out. You've got nothing to lose by clicking the link in the description to see how Navy Federal Credit Union can serve you. As amazing as the Blackhawk helicopter has been over the past 4 decades, there are a few reasons as to why I believe it's time for an upgrade. A next generation of rotor aircraft would be capable of carrying lightweight artillery like the M777 cannon that weighs about 10,000 pounds. The Blackhawk cannot carry that with a max sling load of 9,000 pounds. You'd have to wait for a more powerful Chinook, but there are only about half the amount of Chinook helicopters available, about 1,200. Evidence that the military is taking this scenario very seriously comes from news that the US Marine Corps recently refocused their training on practicing exactly these kinds of air assaults, presumably in preparation for an eventuality that we all pray to God never happens. So instead of amphibious landings using these amphibious crafts, like you saw in the island hopping campaigns of World War II, future assaults would rely more heavily on fast-moving next-generation helicopters to ferry infantry and equipment to the island battle. Slow-moving land crafts are big, fat sitting ducks for modern missiles. These islands would either have no airfield or it would be occupied by opposing forces. This would force the US to use helicopters that can land almost anywhere without a runway. You could basically park it in your own backyard if you wanted to. If I was a Blackhawk helicopter, I would lose mine in a massive New Jersey mall parking lot every single time. Another reason the Army is being pressured to upgrade is the reliability issues. Some troops have even started calling the Blackhawk by their own unofficial nickname, the Crash Hawk. And don't forget, there's an entire movie dedicated to Blackhawks crashing. When we look at the crash data between December 2019 and February 2021, there were a total of 11 Blackhawk helicopter crashes worldwide. A series of recent incidents even prompted a US senator to lead a full-blown investigation into whether the Blackhawk was still fit for service or not. There should have been an investigation into whether or not I was fit for service. It ended up being cleared, but once the politicians start poking around military inventory, it's usually not a good sign. The writing is already on the wall. The over 2,000 total Blackhawks could end up being replaced, and that'll be great news for anyone looking for spare parts for Blackhawk helicopters on eBay. It reminds me a lot of an old congressional investigation from 2010 that I think in part led to the M4 being replaced. The US Army has been considering a brand new replacement since as early as 2004, but it wasn't until 2009 when the Secretary of Defense formally initiated the program and christened the new Future Vertical Lift project. The Future Long Range Assault Aircraft, or FLRAA, is the part that is specifically focused on replacing the Blackhawk. The other part is about the Apache. A lot of taxpayer money is at stake here. One aviation executive estimated that the DoD contract could be worth as much as $80 billion over its lifetime. There are two main competitors in the project. Bell is working jointly with Lockheed Martin on their V-280 Valor, and Sikorsky, that's the creator of the old Blackhawk, they entered their prototype working alongside Boeing with an aircraft called the Defiant X. Both of these teams have created impressive entries, but they each have chosen to go in radically different directions with designs for their prototypes. So we need to go over the different benefits of each option in this competition and how it will completely end up changing decades of established US Army warfighting doctrine with these new capabilities. The first future vertical lift submission is by Bell. They originally wanted to use the same overall design for both the FLRAA and the Scout attack helicopter model, and they planned to modify the size of the models for different capabilities. But the Army peer pressured them into having a different model for the recon and attack variant. It's similar to something you've probably already seen before if you're familiar with the V-220, V-22 Osprey made by Bell. Like the Osprey, this helicopter is triple redundant fly-by-wire. Instead of using the old mechanical systems to control the Blackhawk, which were prone to error, the new fly-by-wire systems send electronic signals to control the aircraft.
I went in person to Washington, D.C. to check out Bell's prototype and to speak to their experts.
So the difference between this and an Osprey is the Osprey was designed several decades ago. We have over 600,000 hours of lessons learned from Ospreys flying around in combat around the world. All those lessons learned, the good and the bad, are applied at the point of design for the V-280 Valor.
Bell already has decades of experience with this kind of tilt rotor aircraft. Bell's medium lift submission is the V-280 Valor. It uses the same concept as the Osprey with a dual tilt rotor design. It has two engines and a single drivetrain that connects the two rotors, meaning that if one engine goes out, the bird can still fly. The aircraft uses digital control panels, basically like giant LED screens that display the engine information instead of old analog panels. So these screens would be very useful for monitoring unmanned drones that act as scouts for the helicopter. And it fits into the US Army's more modern, network-centric warfare doctrine of fighting. Network-centric warfare was a concept invented in 1996 after the old Blackhawk was invented. The future helicopter would fully embrace the idea of rapid target assignment and information being absolutely paramount on the battlefield. These drones would allow soldiers to have a better idea of what the landing zone would look like ahead of time, so they can plan ahead accordingly. A term that a lot of people are probably familiar with is when soldiers ask whether or not an LZ is hot. Drones connected to the next-gen helicopter could help determine if the landing zone was indeed hot or not, allowing soldiers to avoid it altogether if they noticed through thermal imaging that the enemy was planning an ambush. I don't know about you, but personally, I like my landing zones lukewarm. This kind of surveillance adds to troops' situational awareness. The V-280 is already far along in its prototyping demo stages, with it expected to be passing all of its key performance parameters, and it's already hit 300 knots in forward flight.
While I was chatting with Frank, I found out we were both in Iraq at the same exact time. I was a lowly private, and he was a V-22 pilot. So pretty much the same thing. Told me something interesting about why the average infantryman would love this new helicopter.
So there's a perfect example. We would support the Rangers up in, that's a pretty good run from Balad to Crit.
Yeah.
And we would do missions, we'd go pick them up, we'd drop them off, we'd wait. End of the night, mission's done, we'd pick them up, bring them back. And they were excited flying the V-22s because they would make it back for the morning meal. That was a difference, because a lot of times, special operations, there'd be V-22s involved and there'd be rotary wing assets involved. We would pick them up, fly them back, and we'd be halfway home, and we would see the helicopters halfway on their way to Tikrit still to do the drop-off. So they would fight to get the ride back on the V-22 because they'd make their early meal.
Which brings me to the next major change with the FLRAA program, the payload carrying capabilities. The Army request for a proposal asked that the helicopter be able to carry 13,000 pounds. The Blackhawk, for comparison, could only carry 9,000 pounds, which was amazing for its time, but after the US military invested $8 million into developing the General Electric T-64 engine for the Bell aircraft, they're expecting a much higher yield. Can only imagine how much gas is for that helicopter right now. This would change infantry doctrine on the ground because it means you could have an artillery cannon airdropped into a remote location, something that was never really possible before. They even successfully demonstrated a full autonomous flight from takeoff to landing, which is one of the key features of this program. The Army wants to be able to fly these helicopters remotely without risking the valuable pilots' lives. Sure, don't worry about me. The V-280 is an improvement over the Osprey with large egress doors. I like that word, egress. So what's special about the tilt rotor? Well, it blurs the line between helicopter and airplane. This aircraft retains the ability to take off vertically, but then in flight, it can turn its rotors 90 degrees, and now those rotors are effectively propellers. Basically, the aircraft turns into a plane in mid-flight. You get all the benefits of having a plane in flight, like having twice the top speed of a Blackhawk helicopter, while still having the ability to take off and land vertically without a runway. To put a point on this, having a runway is a huge pain in the ass, or making one. If you're a ground element forward operating and advancing on the enemy, you can't be bothered to find the nearest airport for resupply. Another major new priority is that the helicopter needs to be less maintenance intensive, requiring a smaller logistical footprint, so you don't want to be having to carry pieces for this helicopter all around with you all the time. If you land on a remote island, you might not get resupply or parts for maintenance for a longer period of time. So they have to try and cut down on how labor intensive the maintenance is. For reference, the Blackhawk requires about 6 hours of wrench time, maintenance time for every hour that it's in flight. The DoD also wants it to have these better stealth capabilities and higher tolerance to high altitude hot conditions like the ones that they faced in Afghanistan. Now the specifications, requirements, and abilities are still in flux, but the plan is for the new helicopter to carry 4 crew members and additional 14 troops, which is 2 additional dismounted troops. And about the stealth, when they're flying missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're not doing those missions against modern anti-air systems. They were fighting against mostly RPGs, nothing that could lock on and home onto their signature usually. So that's why it's so important that we have these next-gen aircraft now, because in a near-peer battle, the Blackhawk will be outmatched. Before we talk about how the aircraft is different for the Sikorsky submission, here are the bare minimum requirements for both helicopters based on the Army's request for proposal. The helicopters both need to be able to fly a maximum range of 2,440 nautical miles, and they need to be able to reach an altitude of 6,000 feet in about 95 degrees heat. It needs to be able to fly hot and fly high. Some of these on the wish list probably bumped up against reality from what I can gather. It looks like the prototypes might have been downgraded to only needing to carry about 5,300 pounds right now, meaning that they still need to go through more in their demo phase so that they can get up to that 10,000 pound requirement. Sikorsky and Lockheed Martin both designed a model that can be scaled up and down. My understanding is that it can also be used for the Scout Attack helicopter and have components added for additional capabilities. Since all of their models share the same overall design, this means less spin-up time for manufacturing. This option, Defiant X, also uses the latest fly-by-wire control features. The FLRAA medium lift model is named Defiant X and uses 2 rotors and a pusher prop, so the rotors don't tilt in order to give it extra speed. I'm not a fancy helicopter engineer, but there was a lot of controversy in the past about whether or not Bell's Osprey with the tilt rotor design is safe or not, so this might be safer. It uses 30,000 pound advanced coaxial rigid rotor design with a pusher propeller. The entire fuselage or the body is made of composite materials that reduce the vibrations on the aircraft. Bear with me on the next part, it's very important. The dual rotor used on this helicopter allows you to spin your rotor slower and still create the same amount of lift. It's more efficient and in theory lets you get more lift for the same amount of spin. Well, here's where it gets even crazier. The pusher prop on the rear of this design gives forward movement to the aircraft. How most traditional helicopters work is that they pitch the nose down in order to move forward, which uses a percentage of your lift to move forward. This is why the pusher prop in the back of the bid is ingenious. It gives the helicopter natural horizontal movement parallel to the ground. This allows the Defiant X to fly lower to the ground, which makes it more stealthy, ninja-like. The chief test pilot pointed out this meant that he could land the helicopter while maintaining level body deceleration, so he could have a full view of the landing zone with more situational awareness. A way of thinking of air assault missions is to move to a remote location behind the enemy and disrupt their fighting abilities. There are two main missions for the helicopter that is like this. You need to be able to mash troops on an objective quickly, and the second mission is medical evacuation. So you have those raids on an objective where you need stealth and you need an element of surprise, and then you have a medical evacuation where it's very important to get your soldier to a higher level of trauma care faster. Both of those missions require speed, and that's what I think is key to the future vertical lift program. I'll leave you with a really important quote. Tony Crutchfield, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General and Vice President of the Army Systems at Boeing, so he's biased, he is working for Boeing, but I think he really put a great point on how this affects the tactics for ground troops, for your average soldier. When he said, quote, "In the Pacific, it's even more important because your lines of operation are going to be dispersed over a wide area. You're going to have these small bases and supply lines that'll be positioned either on ships or on islands. You're gonna want to move more assets, maneuver in confined terrain, and survive to build that combat power faster than your adversary can, so you can win." End quote. That explanation gets a full-on unironic hoo out of me. I don't know about you. The Army plans to bring the helicopter into service and equip the first units by 2030 for a single unit cost of $40 million per unit. It sounds like to me, after doing a deep dive into the helicopters, that the Army wants something with the power of the Chinook, capable of sling-loading heavy weapons beyond the front lines and behind enemy lines. They want to be able to fly further so that they can hop between remote islands in the South China Sea without needing to stop and refuel every 10 minutes. Remember, these designs are both in development, still in prototyping stage, and a lot of this is subject to change. But from where I'm sitting, it looks like either option is a big upgrade.